May you breathe easy. May your heart be light. May you open your life to each joy, each delight. May you walk with assurance. Your way is blessed. May you dwell in the spirit of yes. May you know your beauty through your loved one's eyes. May you face every change with a taste for surprise. May you welcome each stranger as a treasured guest. May you dwell in the spirit of yes. May we hold all who suffer with loving care. May our being together ease the loads that we bear. May we take up the habit of happiness. May we dwell in the spirit of yes.
Wow, thank you so much, Barbara McAfee. That was such a beautiful, beautiful introduction. Welcome, everyone. That was Barbara McAfee. She is a master voice coach, author, keynote speaker, singer-songwriter who is dedicated to inspiring radical aliveness in everyday life. Her book, Full Voice, guides people to find their voice, whatever that means to them. Barbara was an organizational development consultant for 12 years, specializing in the areas of team building, vision, and communication. She is founder of the Morning Star Singers, a volunteer choir that sings for people facing health challenges. Barbara has released 8 CDs of her music and lives in, and I'm going to say this wrong because I'm a Californian, but I'll do my best, St. Croix Falls in Wisconsin, and we will be hearing her play another song later this evening. Welcome, everyone. A few housekeeping items before we get started. This event is being recorded. We can see you this time, so you may want to turn off your video if you don't want to be seen, but we would love to see your beautiful face if you do want to be seen. Please keep yourself muted. We will be taking questions at the end, and you can ask a question anytime by putting it in the chat box today. Thank you for attending our virtual Pride event today. It's our first one ever. Compassion and Choices, as many of you know, is the leading organization dedicated to empowering everyone to chart their own end-of-life journey. In my work here at Compassion and Choices, I get to meet a lot of people who work in end-of-life care, hospice workers, chaplains, nurses, social workers, and doctors. And I've noticed a common theme. I hear a lot from people I meet that they got their start in doing this end-of-life work during the AIDS epidemic in San Francisco. You might want to have some Kleenex. This is a good time to grab Kleenex, by the way. We will hear tonight about how traumatic that time was. People with AIDS were not respected or treated with dignity when they needed it most. This drove many to become caregivers, especially at the end of life. I feel that we have a responsibility to talk about this history in our state, look at how far we have come, and recognize how far we still have to go. I have had the great privilege of working with our next speaker over the last few years. She is an incredible human, and I am so grateful to have her with us to share her story today. Allyne Hammer is a longtime labor, LGBTQ+, and women's rights activist. She is also a Compassion and Choices volunteer advocate in Santa Cruz for patient-directed care and the end-of-life care option of medical aid in dying. I hand the mic now over to Allyne.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Samantha, so much. I'm so happy and excited to be here and grateful to be part of an organization like Compassion and Choices as they celebrate us during Pride. I am here today because I believe everybody deserves to live and die with dignity. And to that end, I support medical aid in dying, a medical practice where eligible terminally ill people have the option of asking their doctor for medicine to allow them to die peacefully. I support SB 380, the legislation that will improve and make permanent the End of Life Option Act in California. So how is the work Compassionate Choices does related to our community and to Pride? So let's see. Medical aid in dying first came on my radar in the early 80s when AIDS hit our community. Those of you who were there know that there was incredible suffering like we'd never seen before or since. And people were asking for help to die. We used to say it was like a nightmare we couldn't wake up from. But back then, there was no way to legally end your life or help anyone in their life, regardless of the prognosis. Behind me, you will see a picture of the AIDS quilt in Washington, D.C. Back then, it was the tire quilt. Of course, the number of deaths from AIDS continued to grow, with nearly 700,000 people dying of AIDS in 2019. I think this photo is a good visual reminder that so many people suffered and died from AIDS, as well as the huge effect it has on our community. Although there is an endless horror stories from the HIV/AIDS epidemic, I've chosen to share one of my close friend, John, because it's a good example of why medical aid in dying is so important. The AIDS virus took his immune system, so he had horrible diseases that you couldn't even imagine. He had brain damage, pneumocystis pneumonia, tuberculosis, and neurological damage that made him do this every few minutes with his arm. His suffering was severe and he couldn't tolerate it. He wanted to end his life. And as I said, there was no legal way to do that. So on top of everything else, he had to do something illegal just to end his suffering. I can't adequately describe how horrible the suffering was. He had his partner, Mike, go out and buy drugs in the street. I know that had to be hard for Mike since he was not what we called street smart. Plans had to be made as to when this would happen, where it would happen, who to call, and what to do with John's body once he was dead. This was to happen while his partner Mike was at work, but to protect him from any legal issues. Imagine, he couldn't even be with his life partner when he ended his life. And all this just added stress to an already unbearable situation. Plans were made, we all said our goodbyes, and the day arrived for John to end his life. Because it was illegal, no one could be with him. Imagine after all that suffering, he had to die alone. As planned, I waited to the next day to call Mike. I asked how everything went, and to my surprise, he said, he didn't die. John's attempt to end his life had failed. So now, on top of everything else, we had to deal with a failed attempt of him ending his life. Things just kept getting worse. This attempt made him even more debilitated, but he was still alive and still wanting to end his suffering. John chose the only legal option, to stop eating and drinking. It took John 10 days to die that way. He died from dehydration. Can you imagine? It was horrible and unnecessary suffering. And after all that, John was dead. And then just 3 weeks later, Mike tested positive for AIDS, and the cycle continued. This is just one of so many stories of unnecessary suffering. And it makes a good point as to how important medical aid in dying is, because people who can't bear their suffering are going to try to end it, no matter what. And they should have a safe option. Illegal attempts are often violent, and with John, they often fail. People deserve to live and die with dignity. That's why I support medical in dying. And that's why I'm here today with Compassion and Choices, supporting SB 380, the law to make permanent and improve access to medical aid in dying here in California. But we are the survivors of that epidemic. We told them we'd never forget, and we never will. We continue to honor them. I honor them today, even as I speak now. And out of that epidemic came many things to be proud of as we celebrate Pride. It took President Reagan almost 7 years to just say the words AIDS. People were fearful of anyone living with AIDS. There were some that wanted to send everyone with AIDS to live on an island far, far away, saying AIDS was God's punishment for being gay. Just to visit someone with AIDS in the hospital, we had to cover up from head to toe. Of course, we pull it all off as soon as we got in the room. And in spite of all the fear mongering, we'd climb right into bed with our friends and loved ones. But nobody would help us. No one would recognize the epidemic as a public health emergency. Not the president, not the CDC, not the FDA. And so we gathered. We gathered together and we formed the Gay Men's Health Crisis in New York City, ACT UP, the San Francisco AIDS Foundation, Project Inform, and on across the nation. ACT UP was brave. They stood up loud and proud. They changed the way drugs were approved in this country. They saved lives. They let people know they were not alone in their struggles during the epidemic. We made a difference, and we did it in a way that we haven't seen from other communities with healthcare issues. And from loss and turmoil came the heroes of the epidemic. For example, Larry Kramer, the legendary writer, the trailblazing activist in the fight against AIDS. He started both Gay Men's Health Crisis and ACT UP. He was fearless. He lived with AIDS and even had a liver transplant. But by using patient-directed care, he died just a year ago, 1 month before his 85th birthday. A true survivor. Tony Fauci said this of Larry Kramer. Yes, that Tony Fauci. I quote, "In American medicine, there are two eras, before Larry and after Larry. There is no question in my mind that Larry helped change medicine in this country," end quote. Larry Kramer made a huge contribution to our healthcare system. He taught us about patient-directed care, and I am personally grateful to him because I believe that patient-directed care saved my life. That's another story for another time. Clearly, there's still work to be done. Laws and regulations that protected us are now being repealed and rewritten. Just earlier this month, the US Supreme Court ruled in favor of a Catholic Church affiliated agency that refused to serve same-sex couples. There's a high rate of suicide amongst queer and transgender youth. Black trans women are being murdered in the streets, not just nationally, but globally. There are huge health disparities in the LGBT community. So as you can see, the struggle continues, but we still have a lot to be proud of as we celebrate Pride. Just to name a couple things: national marriage equality and open LGBT access to the military. Be proud of our bravery, our diversity, our sense of community, for all we have contributed and for all we've become. I'll end by quoting Larry Kramer. We must fight for our rights, take care of ourselves and each other, be proud of ourselves, be proud we are gay. This should be what every gay person is fighting for 7 days, each and every week. Happy Pride, everyone, and please support SB 380.
Oh, thank you, Alina. Alina is incredible. And when we started brainstorming doing this event, we had to get Alina on board to tell us what to do. What should we do? We asked her, what do we need to share with people? And I'm just, thank you, Alina. We're gonna have to do a lot more of these so you can share more stories.
Thank you.
I would like to say that Elena done a fantastic job. And this is Julius Simmons from Cleveland. And she's a wonderful, wonderful person for the cause and speaking out. And I love her very much.
Thank you, Julius.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alina.
Thank you, everyone, so much.
Next, we're going to hear from one of the people who is responsible for authorizing medical aid in dying in California. Senator Susan Talamantes Eggman authorized, she was one of the lead authors of the End of Life Option Act in 2015, and now is championing a bill to keep and improve SB 380. And so without further ado, we will hear from Senator Eggman.
Good evening, everybody. And thank you, Sam, for inviting me. And I am so humbled to hear your story, Alina. That was, it took me back and made me proud all over again. And thank you for all you did, because that was truly an incredible time we all lived through again. I mean, just think about, we lived through that pandemic, and then we have Anthony Fauci with this last one. I mean, what we've lived through in many of our lifetimes is incredible. But anyway, hello, everybody. I'm Susan Eggman. I happen to serve as a state senator right now, but my profession is as a social worker. And I also, I am an out lesbian, and I have personally cared for my grandmother as she died. It was my 20s. My godmother, when she died, was my 30s. My mother, when she died, I was in my 40s. And then in my 50s, I cared for my sister-in-law and my dad. And I was with them all at the time of their death. And I was a hospice social worker. So I did hospice work for probably a decade. And then I did I have my PhD on end of life Option Act in Oregon. I happened to be in Portland. That was where I did my PhD in 1997 when their End of Life Option Act went into effect. So I was able to do research around it and became very interested. You know, I've always been interested in the topic, but there are just so many times working in hospice where families, you know, who were prepared, who had done everything, and then the end was just so horrifying and scarring for them, right? Not for everybody, but there were those who would say there should be another way. There should be another option. And well, I lived in Turlock. I didn't live in a city, with a city, but of a small one. And so we would more get in my hospice caseload people who had come back home to die, who had left the city and had come back home to die, and were, you know, had been oftentimes estranged from their families for a long time. So that was part of the work, is helping those families heal. But also just witnessing the love of people coming back together was so tremendous. And, and watching people, as we know, wither away and die before our very eyes, in a very painful way sometimes, and parents crying and everybody crying. Just, there should be a different way. So when I got into the legislature, that was something that I knew I wanted to work on, was this very issue. And I thought it would be at the end of my term, not at the beginning of my term. But an opportunity happened to arise, and for everything there is a season. As you know, when Brittany Menard went to Oregon, it created an energy and a pathway, and so we were able to take it and get that bill passed. And again, something I thought I would do at the end of my career, but I was able to do, at the end of my time, able to do it now. But the impact of it, I think, and Sam, I'll tell you, we're coming up in committee again next week, and one of the most stickiest person, I don't know if you remember, but really a powerful legislator who fought very hard to kill the bill last time. I just had a meeting with her to make sure that she wasn't going to do that in this next committee in Judiciary, and she happened to experience a peaceful death over the pandemic, and saw the difference that made. And while I don't think she's going to vote for it, she is not going to rail against it, and she is not going to try to stop other people. So I think, and again, in this work, as you know, right, it's being present, it's sitting together, it's listening to people's stories that allow people to get to a better place of understanding. Because all of us here, we are in this work because we have experienced death, and sometimes a lot of it. Most people don't experience it, are lucky in different kinds of ways. They don't experience it at the levels that some of us have, fortunately or unfortunately. And so they might have one experience, and they always tend to place their arguments and their emotions on that past experience, and somehow feeling like if they support something like this, that would mean they were okay with their person dying. And because we're such death denying people, I think that's what makes it so difficult. So that said, I'm gratified to be here. Again, my own stories can't match what people have. I have been a caregiver, and I have been a legislator, and I've certainly sat with people. And I think what Compassion and Choices has been able to do and help mobilize across the country is incredible. And I want to thank the organization for all the work that they've done. I can tell you, every time that I presented something or I speak somewhere, I look out and I see a sea of yellow T-shirts out there that scream Compassion and Choices, and feel so supported. And when we are in this battle, it's interesting, right? Because we know it's a battle, and ACT UP had its place and everything, but at this point, it's more about the compassion. And as we're moving things through, understanding that we really need to be present with people to be able to hear their fears about it and make space for that, and then move forward, and understanding they're all going to experience it at some time. I might look back on the present struggle and the present law and any difficulties that might be having, and have different, and like she did, she was adamant against it. She's experienced something with it now, and comes away with a whole different take on what this does for people. So, I was so moved by Alita's story that I Sam knows I can talk forever, or I can just say, I'm so proud to be here with you, and happy Pride to everybody. And what a tremendous movement that we have had, and should feel so proud about, really, I think, reforming healthcare. And I will say this year, the LGBT caucus, we were able to get funding for PrEP and PEP, and be able to do, we've got money for the LGBT archives and museums in California, to really be able to do a lot of funding with this historic amount. We're trying to send as much as we can down to our community, to some of our Pride centers that we know have been shut down for this whole year, and are such safe places for people to be able to go. So it's a time to, to put up our shoes and get back to work. And this time we do it trying to bring as many people as possible as we can. And I will just share too, I have a friend who was one of the first diagnosed folks back in the early days, and he's still alive. And I can't believe, and nobody can believe how many times he has come to the end. He wears his heart on his belt, we say, because he's got a clip on, and his life's not the same, but he still has a great quality of life. And we'll use this when he has fought for all this time, right? So the whole idea of someone's going to get a diagnosis and take the medication the next day, have never, been with somebody during hospice. And I don't know if you've seen that the last reports from California for 2020 just came out, very consistent with the previous data. This is not something that abused. This is something that brings people comfort and peace, and we need to fix it and go from that 15 days down to the 2 days so people can actually use the law that we've passed and implemented.
Thank you so much, Senator Eggman. We love you, and we're so grateful for you and all the work that you do. Thank you for taking the time to be with us and all the great work. I'm excited for the hearing next week. It's the last policy hearing. We're getting there. Still a long way to go.
Yeah,
and thank you to everybody here who's helped with the bill.
Totally. Yes.
And we'll talk a little bit more about the bill later and how to get involved. I did ask Alina, I said, should we talk about the bill? Should we talk about medical aid and dying? Is that inappropriate? And Alina was like, well, I'm not doing this unless you talk about that. We got to keep fighting.
Yeah.
We do want to take a few minutes, though, to reflect and remember all of the loved ones we have lost along the way. All the people who have really made a huge impact on our lives and on the world. And so I'm going to invite Barbara McAfee back to play another song while we take a few minutes, light a candle if you want to, and just reflect.
Thank you so much, you warriors, good warriors. We're all that. This is a song called Living Dying Man. I wrote it for my friend, Jamie Shokir, as he was traveling his last months with ALS, another horrible way to die. He had a good death, but there was no guarantee that he would. We had a lot of conversations, and so I feel like we kind of co-wrote the song. Living dying man, we're through with making plans. Tomorrow is a place you will not see. We hate to see you go, even so we know mortality is clarifying. Death becomes less terrifying when you look it straight in the eye. Time to live, time to die. You're living, dying well. You know the truths you tell. When any hope you had finally set you free, you've made it very clear. Heaven is right here. Reality is fortifying. Death becomes less mortifying when you look it straight in the eye. Time to live, time to die. Live and dying friend, coming to the end. There's nothing left to do but love and let you go. is clarifying. Death becomes less terrifying when you look it straight in the eye. Time to live, time to die, time to say goodbye.
Thank you so much, Barbara. As we continue to reflect and remember, I'm going to invite Patricia Gonzalez Portillo. She's our national Latino media outreach director here at Compassion and Choices. Many of you know her and probably remember her from the 2015 campaign. And she's going to talk about an important person, Michael Somm.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to talk about our friend Michael Somm. Michael Somm always knew he was going to die from the massive tumor that invaded his brain. But he never imagined dying alone. Michael was 40 when he died August 6, 2020, at midnight at a rehab center in Southern California, where he lived for the last 4 years. Michael was the first known terminally ill transgender person in the nation to publicly urge lawmakers to pass laws that allow mentally capable, terminally ill adults the option to request prescription medication they can decide to take to die peacefully if their suffering becomes unbearable. A proud advocate for the LGBT community, Michael successfully urged California lawmakers to pass the End of Life Option Act in 2015. I met Michael in 2015 when we were trying to pass the state's medical aid in dying law in California. He reached out to Compassion and Choices in hopes that his story of living with brain cancer would help convince legislators about the importance of passing the End of Life Option Act. He spoke to TV, print, radio journalists throughout the state of California, despite his constant pain. Pounding headaches, unstoppable nausea caused by the illness that was spreading throughout his body. His story appeared on the front page of the Los Angeles Daily News as an editorial in the Sacramento Bee and in several LGBTQ publications throughout the state. Michael was a foodie. He loved banana splits, and like me, he loved the Beatles. So I knew something was wrong when Michael stopped liking the songs I posted for him. It meant Michael was in the hospital again, where I would go sing and play his favorite tune, Yesterday. But he never stopped advocating for compassionate laws, something he hoped would be a part of his legacy. We all have a gift in life, Michael said. We all have a chance to do something amazing. I will go in peace, knowing that I help give people dying of a terminal illness the option to die peacefully. I last spoke to Michael sometime in June. I reminded him of his legacy. You're the first transgender to advocate for medical aid and dying laws in the United States, I said. Michael was proud. I told him, we'll talk soon, as I often did. And just before I hung up, I sang to him that one Beatles song that connected both of us. Suddenly, I'm not half the man I used to be. There's a shadow hanging over me. Oh, yesterday came suddenly. All of us at Compassion and Choices are forever thankful to Michael for being a champion for terminally ill LGBTQ Californians whose last wish in life is to die peacefully without unnecessary suffering. Rest in peace, Michael Dears. Rest in peace, Michael Dean Somm.
Thank you, Pat. Next, we're going to watch a short video of Michael Somm that he made before he passed away. Maybe. Yeah, there we go.
My name is Michael Somm. I'm 39 years old and I have been diagnosed with brain cancer. I am dying within the next 6 months. I'm not scared to die. My whole body, from my feet to my head, it hurts. I am in constant pain. I have severe headaches. I don't know how to describe it because I can't get the words out.
For him, taking the morphine that they were giving him on a regular basis, it wasn't doing anything. Throwing up or laying in bed, you know, in the fetal position because his stomach hurts, his legs hurt, you know, all the hallucinations and everything that goes with all of this. He's actually participating in planning his funeral, what he wants done, how he wants it, all that. So, and he's writing letters that he would like read at his services also.
Tired of the pain? Yes, I am ready to go.
Michael Somm was an incredible advocate. We were lucky to have his support and advocacy. I'm going to take a few minutes now to talk about the various end-of-life options that are available to people, because one thing we've learned is that a lot of times, in order to have a peaceful death, in order to really be empowered at the end of life, you really have to advocate for yourself. And we always encourage people to talk to your doctor. Talk to your doctor today, even if you're not terminally ill. I've talked to my doctor to see if he would support me in the full range of end-of-life options should I get sick, because I want to make sure that my doctor supports my values. So I'll go through this rather quickly, but the first end-of-life option is pursuing life-sustaining treatment. But make sure you know what that means. Sometimes, you know, things like CPR look really cool in the movies, but in real life, people usually have ribs broken, and it's wonderful if it's what you want and it can bring the person back to life. But if you already have other health issues, you know, you want to make sure that's something you want, and put it in your advanced healthcare directive. Refusing or discontinuing treatment is something that we don't always think about. You know, there's a lot of doctors who still see death as failure, and they want to try until, you know, the very end to keep a person alive, which, you know, isn't necessarily a bad thing. But if you're ready to go and, you know, you're terminally ill, refusing treatment and just making sure you have palliative care, that means that you have comfort care, can be a beautiful end of life option. Hospice is something that everyone should enroll in when they're at the end of their life. Hospice is a wonderful thing. They can come and help you and your family. The next one is voluntarily stopping eating and drinking. You know, I know Alina described it, and if it's done well, it can be a beautiful end of life option. If the person has palliative care, again, that's comfort care. You know, a lot of times when a person's body naturally starts shutting down, we think that it's compassionate to force feed them because that feels like the kind thing to do, but it may not be what the person wants, especially depending on the quality of their life, if they're at the end of their life. So it's really important to document in your advanced healthcare directive what end of life options you want so that your loved ones know. Tell people, tell your loved ones, and make sure you have someone to advocate for you if you're unable to advocate for yourself. Another end of life option is continuous deep sedation. And finally, medical aid in dying, which I'm going to talk a little bit more because it can be very complicated to access. So what do we mean by medical aid in dying? Well, the definition is that it's a medical practice that gives a mentally capable adult who is terminally ill with 6 months or less to live the option to request their doctor to write a prescription for medication that they may ingest to die peacefully in their sleep if their suffering becomes unbearable. This is not an option for someone who has advanced Alzheimer's. You have to really understand what you're asking for, and you have to be able to ask for it multiple times. Talk to your doctor if you think this is something you might want should you become eligible for medical aid in dying. Like I said before, my doctor was shocked when I brought this up. No one had ever spoken to him about it, and he really didn't know if he could write a prescription for aid in dying medication for a terminally ill person. But after I talked to him about it, he thought about it and he realized, you know what, if you're dying and this is what you want, it's my duty to support you in it. And I was really glad because I didn't want to have to find another doctor. And, I joke about it, but we hear these horrible stories from people who are terminally ill. They thought their doctor would support them, and then they feel completely abandoned when their doctor won't support them. So again, talk to your doctor. If you're afraid to talk to your doctor, you can write a letter or bring someone with you who's not afraid to help you have that conversation. If your doctor says they won't support you in medical aid in dying, you can ask your doctor if they're allowed to prescribe. We know 97% of religious hospitals in California don't allow their doctors to practice. So if you get care at Dignity Health, at an Adventist healthcare system like Loma Linda, those doctors are not allowed to support you in the full range of end of life options. So then you might need to find a hospice or another healthcare facility where you can find a doctor who will support you. You can also ask them if you're their first patient requesting medical aid in dying. Maybe they just don't understand what the law is. Maybe they don't want to take the extra time, or they've heard fake news about what medical aid in dying is. We do have a free confidential consultation called Doc to Doc that your doctor can call and talk to another doctor who will mentor them and support them through the process. You should always ask your doctor to refer you to a doctor who will support you. It's your doctor's responsibility. They shouldn't let you fall through the cracks. And finally, you can call our end of life consultation line for support. Yes, it's the same phone number as Doc to Doc, but the recording will guide you so that you'll press the right buttons, and then you'll leave a message and somebody will call you back in 24 to 48 hours. It's important to decide what you want. We have a lot of great tools on our website to help you figure out what you want for your advanced care directive, for your end of life decisions. So, look through these resources and figure out what you want at the end of life and really think through it. Sometimes it's hard. One of my most favorite tools is our Finish Strong tool. And it goes through the different stages of dementia. And I had to really think about, okay, if I'm happy, but I don't recognize anybody, would I want to continue everything to continue my life, or would I want a compassionate end of life option should I become ill? So take some time and think through it, and do this, every couple of years, because things change and what you want may change. Make sure you know who will speak for you, have a medical proxy or a power of attorney, someone who, if you can't speak for yourself, they will speak for you. Keeping and improving the law. So as we've mentioned several times, there's a bill called Senate Bill 380. And what it does is it maintains the End of Life Option Act's core safeguards. So everything I described earlier will still be true under Senate Bill 380. You still need to be terminally ill with 6 months or less to live, mentally capable of making medical decisions, and able to self-ingest the medication. But what it does do is it reduces the mandatory minimum waiting period of 15 days down to just 2 days. We know that at least or around 30% of terminally ill patients die during the 15-day waiting period. We actually have that statistic from Kaiser, and Kaiser is one of the best healthcare systems when it comes to patient-directed care at end of life. So if 30% of Kaiser's terminally ill patients can't survive the 15-day waiting period, I imagine that number is far higher when we look at all terminally ill Californians, especially if they start out at a place like Dignity Health, where they can't access the full range of end-of-life care options. This bill also eliminates the sunset provision. That means, it's a fancy way of saying the End-of-Life Option Act is going to go away at the end of 2025 if we don't reauthorize it. We cannot lose the option of medical aid in dying in California. We've already heard tonight about the AIDS pandemic and how traumatic that was. We cannot lose this law. If you're interested in helping us, this bill still has a long way to go. You know, it's already passed 5 committees hearings, I think. All of our supporters I hope they don't burn out, because it is a lot of work to get these bills passed, and we cannot do it without you. I think people will put in the chat box, we have links, and we'll send you in a follow-up email too. We have links for you to easily email your representative and urge them to vote yes on SB 380. You can help us get individual and organizational endorsements of SB 380. You can sign our petition. We have about 1,400 signatures now and counting. I'd love to get that up to more than 2,000. You can sign up to phone bank with us, help us find storytellers. I'm sure many of you remember Brittany Menard. She changed the face of this country for medical aid in dying by sharing her personal story. If you have a personal story about death and dying you would like to share, we have an easy link you can fill out, and we will help you share your story more widely. Talk to your friends and family about this. I know it can be a difficult topic, but it's so important. Death is going to happen to all of us, and we want to make sure that this option is available so that people can decide whether or not they want to use it should they become eligible. And finally, you can attend our virtual lobby days and hearings. We have one coming up on July 8th. And we would be very happy to have you be part of it. Finally, you can contact us anytime. I forgot to say who I was tonight. My name is Samantha Trad. I'm the California State Director. Christina Goodwin is on, as well as Leslie Chinchilla. They're in the background doing all the fancy stuff to make this Zoom go. And they're always happy to help. So with that, I'm now going to hand it over to Jason Stubbers, who's going to talk to you about some other fun stuff.
Great, thank you so much, Sam, and glad to see everyone at our amazing Pride event today. In addition to today's program, in recognition of Pride Month, we remain committed to elevating the voices and engaging those representing the LGBTQ+ community year-round. We recognize that the end of life can be more difficult for LGBTQ+ people and their loved ones due to the continued discrimination and underrepresentation of LGBTQ+ relationships. That's why we create resources and conduct outreach to the LGBTQ+ community through toolkits, blogs, our storytellers program, like Sam talked about, Pride materials packs for in-person events, sponsorships, and collaborations with national and regional organizations. At this time, I would like to take a moment for an exciting announcement. We are in the beginning process of forming an LGBTQ+ leadership council here at Compassion and Choices. More information is forthcoming in the weeks ahead. Some upcoming Pride events that will be taking place, and I will be putting the link in the chat so that everyone can view those as well. Center for Black Equity is holding their 30th annual DC Black Pride Awards reception on Wednesday, July 21st. And Terrific Incorporated is holding an event on June 30th at the Cambria Hotel. And you can find both of those events in the link that I just provided in the chat. Compassion and Choices is funded almost exclusively by individual donors, people like you who are committed to issues of end-of-life care and choice. Please consider making a donation today to help us expand our work and ensure that everyone's priorities and values are met at the end of life. Every donation of any amount makes a difference, as these donations allow us to continue improving care and expanding options at the end of life. If you enjoyed the presentation today, please consider making a donation so that we can bring similar presentations to other people. And I'll be posting the link in the chat if you would like to make a donation today. And at this time, I would like to thank you and hand it back over to Samantha Tran.
There we go. I unmuted myself. Thank you, Jason. Now we are at the end of our program. So if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. We would love to have a discussion with you. You can also send us questions privately if you prefer to remain anonymous. So we can talk about what we've heard tonight, or if there's questions you have about end of life options. I did forget to mention, SB 380 is California specific. There are now 10 states in Washington, D.C. have all authorized aid in dying medication. Almost all of them are based off of Oregon's law, which they've had since the 90s. And we are working so hard in more states to try to authorize medical aid in dying. So if you don't live in California and you want to get involved, we would love to have your support. And with that, I see a question that's popped up here for Alina. Alina, is there any environmental indication like a rainbow flag of welcoming care at your healthcare facility?
Not that I am aware of. And as a matter of fact, I had my doctor was doing a yearly, of course, I'm drawing a blank on what that is, a medical exam every year. He was going down the list of questions that came from, I believe, Medicare. And he said to me, have you had sex with a man in the last 6 months? And so I had to stop the conversation and explain to him that I'm queer, I am bisexual, so I do have sex with both men and women when I can. And that if he wanted to be more inclusive and not leave people out, that he could just, the question could just be, have you had sex in the last 6 months? It's an easy solution. So thank you for the question. And it is an issue about being visible in our healthcare systems.
I love that example. Thank you, Alina. I really appreciate you sharing that. There's still so much stigmatization, and we have to figure out ways to get rid of it. I'm a Kaiser patient, and I was really surprised, actually. I went to Kaiser 2 weeks ago, and they had a big pride flag inside and a sign that talked about, they believe in patient-directed care, and they want to be inclusive. And because we do work with Kaiser and other healthcare systems, I know that they at least try to walk the walk. I know that, it always depends with who you talk to, right, at the end of the day. But I think things are slowly changing. The UC Board of Regents recently decided that the UC healthcare systems are no longer allowed to facilitate with places that don't allow the full range of medicine. And if they do that, they have to make sure that the doctors can still provide the full range of care to patients if they can't transfer them. This has been a real problem here in California, where the UC health system, which is, traditionally been wonderful, has been affiliating with religious healthcare systems like Dignity Health. And so patients are left without the full range of medicine, which includes end of life care. And so it's something we have been rallying for and wanting to really push UC Health to make sure that all UC Health patients can have the full range of end of life options. I think I see another question here. This is another question for Alina. After disclosure of your LGBTQI+ identity, would you describe the environment at the place where you receive medical treatment as more or less welcoming?
So this time I have to identify that my healthcare system is Dignity. Actually, it's Dominican, because I think dignity is a misnomer, and I refuse to use that word. So I would say in a healthcare system like that, it's it's individual. The system itself does not support LGBT people or recognize in any way, but you can have your own individual physicians that do. And that's the best, in my experience anyway, that's the best support that you're going to get is on a one-on-one basis with individual doctors. But some healthcare systems are not going to support us, and I'm being kind.
How difficult is it for you, Alina, to find resources to support people in the queer community?
Whoa.
What advice do you have for finding resources?
So this is a great question. So I happen to live in a great community where there's a huge queer community within the town that I live in. And we have a lot of visibility and a lot of support. But imagine somebody that lives in a state that doesn't have that, and what can they do? So I just recently got a call actually they were looking for a support group for a trans male with breast cancer. So that's a very specific need, and you can imagine that if you're a trans male and you go to a support group for breast cancer and it's all women, that nobody's going to know anything about your experience at all. So it's a really, really, really important issue. And I was able to actually find him a couple of resources for him to contact, but that was in the Bay Area, so it would be more likely to happen. But the more remote, unfortunately, the more difficult it is.
Thank you, Alina. Thank you for sharing that. I have a friend who's a trans man, and he was at a religious healthcare system, an Adventist one, at the height of the pandemic. And they messed up on his medication, on his hormones, and he didn't know what to do. It was awful. Everybody's already under so much distress because of the pandemic. But thankfully, he was able to advocate for himself. And even at this religious healthcare system, they were finally able to help him and get him the hormones that he needed. So, I long for the day when we don't have to be such strong advocates for ourselves, when it just is a natural thing. Oh, this is what the patient needs. Okay, that's what they said. I will listen to them. But we're not quite there yet. So,
No.
Somebody asked, would you suggest a PPO instead of an HMO? And I don't think we're really at liberty to, at least I don't have advice on which of those would be better. I think it really, a lot of it actually too depends on your relationship with your doctor. Most doctors who do prescribe medical aid in dying tend to be family physicians who've known people for a long time, and who seem to understand that death is part of life. It's not failure. So, I'm sorry we don't have an answer for you, Demetrius. But I encourage you to search around, talk to your doctors, and see if they will support you. We only have a few minutes left, so I want to take this time to thank everyone who has helped to organize this today. I also wanted to give a special shout out to Fred Philippi, who is one of our volunteers who helped to organize this event today. Thank you so much, Fred, for your time. We've invited a lot of organizations to be part of this. We really want to have outreach as much as possible. We want to reach as many people as possible. It can be difficult to talk about death. It can be hard to talk about our history and where we still need to go, but it's so incredibly important. And so I'm grateful for all of you here today. Thank you to everyone who helped to organize this. Thank you, Barbara McAfee. Thank you, Susan Talamantes Eggman, Allyne Hammer, Fred Philippi, and all of the CNC staff and support who've put so much time and effort. I hope this is the first of many. I hope this becomes an annual event. And with that, thank you all, and I hope you have a beautiful night. Happy Pride, everyone.
night.